Amen. That was the test that I failed the first time. So now we got sound, right? Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for inviting me home. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Florida Conference. Thank you, friends from my hometown of New Milford, Connecticut. You too! Close! Thank you, family of my college friends. Thank you, friends, that I've had the opportunity to share stories with over the last 24 hours. Is it only that? I'm thrilled to be here and feeling this circle of love as we share our stories. I was struck by the line of wanting to create a world where we are all the Adams and Eves, right? Where we see one another. And I often begin with a song that I learned from my friend Masanko Banda. So if you were in my workshop yesterday, I taught you this song. Yeah, y'all know it from home too, because I teach it everywhere I go. It's kind of an introductory way for me to set this context from where I'm coming from in the work that I do. And I'm grateful to my friend Masanko for having shared this song with me. He's from Malawi, and in Malawi when people greet one another, they sometimes speak English because Malawi was colonized by the British. But they also have local languages, and one of them is Chichewa. And when you greet one another in Chichewa, you say, Da Kuona. Try it. Da Kuona. And what that was good. That was good. It's good. It means literally, I see you. I see you. When Masanko sang this song to me, I said, I want to learn it, and can I teach it? He said, yes, and we believe that this song is going to change the world. So we teach it. I teach it. So the song goes like this. Da kuona, da kuona, da kuona, no. See, some of them remember from yesterday. And that means I greet you with respect. All over the continent, when you want to greet somebody with respect, you look at them and you clap 3 times, pretty much like this. All right? And that's a sign of respect. So the song, we move from our, oh, it's so far. Oh my goodness, I'm just looking around here. It's so good to see you. All right, so we move our hands from our eyes to our hearts. So we're saying with our whole body, I see you with my, I see you with my, I see you in front of me. And I greet you with respect. All right, let's try it. Y'all ready? Okay. I know you are because you were ahead of me. I'm slowing us down. Sorry. Here we go. It's because I'm feeling the feels. Okay, here we go. Da kuona, da kuona, da kuona. Oh, try it again. Da kuona, da kuona, da kuona. Oh, beautiful. Now, do me a favor. Our village has gathered in the second service today, so would you please turn to somebody near you. Look them live in the eyes, because we're not looking anybody dead in the eyes today. And sing this greeting so they know that you see them with your eyes and your heart and you greet them with respect. Here we go. Da kuona, da when we were looking at storytelling as a spiritual practice was how vulnerable, how fun it is, and at the same time sometimes how vulnerable it can be to actually open ourselves up so that we can be seen and that we can see one another. But that beautiful offering is what can help us move from an extravagant welcome, which is so delicious, to real relationship. This is a church and a place of transplants, am I right? And a lot of people kind of come and go and pass on through, and there's a warmth here that's rich and real and wonderful, and a welcome that feels so warm. And the stories can help us deepen that even more to relationship, because when we come from someplace else, we come from a life that the person sitting next to us in the pew may not know. And so even though there might be a welcome, there might be a little bit of loneliness if there's no place to share that story of who we are. So when I was listening to Margaret Walker's poem, it was making me think of a couple of stories that I want to share with you. I'm going to just give a little brief one because I wasn't planning to tell the story, but she is like, you better mention me. You better mention my name. And her name was Ona Maria Judge Staines. Has anybody ever heard of her before? She was an African-American woman. She was enslaved in the 1700s. And she was owned by George Washington. And when George Washington was made the first president of the United States, General Washington, you're it! And he needed to move his residence and his family and create a life. First he went to New York and he brought with him some enslaved people. And one of them was a young girl by the name of Oni Judge. Her mother was a dowered slave to Martha Washington, and her father had been an indentured servant, Irishman. They were tailors and seamstresses. And when Oni was about 10 years old, she moved into the Washington home to take care of the grandchildren who were living in George and Martha's home. And she was a mistress of the needle. And Mrs. Washington loved her work more than anything. And so Oni was brought with the Washingtons when they went to the very first president's home in New York. And when that family moved from New York to Philadelphia, about a year later, Oni went along. And there was slavery, obviously, at that time. But when they arrived in Philadelphia, after some time, the Washingtons were alerted to a new practice that Pennsylvania had put into law. It wasn't a national law, but it was a state law where Pennsylvania had decided that if an enslaved person stayed within the confines of Pennsylvania for 6 months, he or she could petition for their freedom. Now, Oni Judge got to hang out with Mrs. Washington, and there were many free black people in the city of brotherly love. other servants and enslaved people, certainly who must have been talking about this practice. George Washington was alerted, and so he started a practice of making sure that he brought his slaves back to Mount Vernon within that 6-month time period so it would constantly restart the clock. Smart! You know the loopholes, they're always there. But in 1796, when Oni was about 22 years old and she'd been living in Philadelphia for about 6 years or so, she'd been to the theater, she'd been to the circus, she'd done all sorts of wonderful things. One night she heard that Martha Washington's granddaughter was getting married, and that she, Oni, was to be given to her as a wedding present. Oni Judge Staines lived the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, because she was Martha Washington's property. And even though George Washington, when he died, freed his slaves, when Martha Washington died, she did not. She passed them on to her grandchildren. So all of her life, Oni lived semi-safe. And she lived in poverty. She had known great wealth. She'd been to the theater in Philly. But she could barely make it. The folks of New Hampshire, she was a pauper, so they paid for her to live. She learned how to read and she learned how to write, and she found a small church in New Hampshire. And at the old age, she and the woman that she lived with would come and they would sit in the church. And a young minister from somewhere else had heard stories that this woman had lived with the Washingtons. And so one day that minister paid a visit and was invited in, and the two of them sat and shared stories. And that man wrote her story down, and it was published in the newspaper. And one of the things that Oni said about her own life was how grateful she was not just to be free in body, but to have learned to read so that she could read the Bible and the Word of God, and knowing without a doubt that no matter what happened to her in her life, she knew that God loved her as she loved God. I was trying to figure out why Oni wanted me to tell her story just now, and she passed away in February of 1848. And not many of us know her story. Some of you in New Hampshire may have heard something about it. There's a book I just picked up again called Never Caught, which is a really beautiful account that gives a rich historical context. I wonder what it was like for her to be living in the place where she was, with such an incredible story that many people didn't know. But finally they did. And because they did, we can know it as well. So that's a true story that comes from our history. I told a different story in the first service, So there you go. So you'll have to ask them about that story, because we don't have time for that story too. But it's a good one. I promise. I wanted to talk about the ways that sometimes our history and our stories can keep us separate, right? Especially when the laws of the land have made us separate too. My father was black and my mother was white, and they got married in '63. So some of y'all know what I'm talking about. It was illegal in 17 states for interracial marriage to happen. It was not illegal in New York. But that is the context for my being here on this earth. I'm always conscious of the fact that I am a product of that civil rights movement. And I say that one because when we hear Margaret Walker's poem, we know that she was talking about another movement. And when I tell you the story of Oni Judge, that was at the foundation of our country's birth. So this is not a new thing for us. It's just our now time that we're trying to figure out what makes us different and how are we the same, and if we are different, can we find any common ground at all? And I'm speaking with elders here in the room, so I know that you know a time when there was respect and decorum and a way to have civil conversation and discourse. And we need you to help us in that. Okay, that's the preachy part. We need the bridges. And what I also know for sure is that we who come here in this place, in God's house, as, I don't even really want to say members of the body of Christ, but that'll work if you want to count your finger as a member and your toe as a member. You know, we are, as we come together as the body of Christ in the world, we are reminded, we can be reminded whose we are. So I'm going to finish with this little story biblically. We touched on it yesterday. We were playing around with it in our workshop yesterday. So Marsha, I told you that I like to do it as a child. So you'll see my version of a child telling the story of Jesus' baptism. We're almost to Lent. It'll be in the lectionary in a couple weeks, and you'll be like, oh, I already heard that one if you use the lectionary. I don't know. So I like to imagine what it would have been like to have witnessed Jesus' baptism. I was a little girl in the Congregational Church. I did not get dunked. Did anybody here get dunked? Oh, okay. Yeah. My mother was a Baptist, so she got dunked. My dad was Episcopalian. He probably got sprinkled. Anyway, here's the story. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by... Yes! religious and go change your dress. So I did. Went and changed my dress. And then when we came out of the house, everybody in the whole village was headed down towards that Jordan River. Ooh, the littlest babies that needed to be carried, and the old ones that needed help over the rough road, the really nice people that I like a lot, the big kids I want to be like one day, and some of the ones that are kind of mean and sour looking, you know what I mean. And then the ones that have those weird habits and things. Everybody was heading down there towards that river. And when we got close, I could see this man. He was standing up there and he was talking to the most important religious people around, the Pharisees, and he was raising up his hand like this and calling them broods of vipers. Yes, he was. And you should have seen him. He looked kind of crazy. He was dressed in a camel skin and his hair was wild, and somebody said he had just come out of the wilderness where he was living on locusts. Wild honey, that sounded kind of good. I really like the locust idea. Somebody said his name was John the Baptist, and he was yelling and screaming. He said that he said he was going to baptize people with water, but somebody was coming who was going to baptize with the power of the Holy Spirit. And I asked my mother, what's that? She said, stop asking so many questions. So then that man, John the Baptist, he got down in the water, in that river, and when he got there, he started inviting people to come into that water right there. And I was watching. He put his hand on their backs and another hand up here, and he whispered something to them, and then he dumped them right down in the water and brought them back up. My mother said I needed to be the first one in our family to do that. So I climbed down into that river, and I was standing there, and there was that man, John the Baptist, and he put one hand on my back and the other hand right up here, and then he whispered to me. Do you want to know what he said? He said, close your eyes and hold your breath. So I did. I closed my eyes and I held my breath, and then he dumped me down into that river, and then I thought I was drowning, and he finally brought me back up, and I was sputtering and everything, and I was looking at him. That man who just about drowned me wasn't even paying any attention to me at all. He was looking right over me. And so I wanted to see who he was looking at, who was more important than me, who he just about drowned in that dirty Jordan because everybody had put their feet all up in it. And when I looked where he was looking, I saw this man coming through the crowd. I never saw him before. And to tell you the truth, he looked kind of ordinary. But there was definitely something special about him. Because when he was walking through the crowd, everyone he passed by would stop talking and turn, and they would look. And it was kind of like the Prince of Peace was walking right through. And John the Baptist about realized that I was there, so he motioned me up onto the riverbank, and I was sitting there dripping wet, and that man came and stood right next to me, and I heard somebody say that his name was Jesus. And I could feel that peace. And Jesus was looking down into the river at John the Baptist, and I heard him say, hello, cousin. Cousins! And then I heard him say to John the Baptist that he wanted John the Baptist to baptize him. And then it was so funny because all of a sudden John the Baptist didn't even know how to speak anymore. He was stuttering and everything. He was saying, And he climbed right down into that river. And he was right in front of me. And John the Baptist had to move back a little bit to make room for him. And then John the Baptist put one hand on his back and one hand right up on his forehead. And he whispered to him. I know what he said. And then he dumped him right down into the water. And then this is the part that you might not believe, but I'm going to tell you what I saw. All of a sudden the heavens just burst right open and this dove came down, and then I heard, it was kind of like a singing, "This is my beloved son, I am well pleased." Nobody had to tell me that was God talking. And I was thinking, wow, that's God's son. Right there in front of me. And John the Baptist was leading him right over to the riverbank, and he climbed up on the riverbank, and he was dripping wet just like me. And I could feel that peace coming over me. And that man Jesus, he put his head down. So I did the same thing. I put my head down. I wanted to be just like him. And I was getting real quiet. And I heard something. I heard it in my heart like a still small voice. It wasn't really big like when the heavens opened up. But I heard this little voice in my heart say, "Beloved." I knew that was God talking to me in a whisper. And I heard it. And I was thinking, that's God's beloved son. I was just there and here next to him, and I must be God's beloved daughter. That made me so excited. Then I opened up my eyes and I was looking around at everybody. You know, the cranky ones. The ones I really like.